Hey guys.
Get out of here, you know how to play.
Introducing the Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy. You can learn all the secrets and strategies you'll need to become a true Pokemon Master Trainer, rated E for everyone.
Ha! A Thunder Punch combined with the paralyzing attack move makes Electabuzz arguably the best all-around Pokemon in the game.
Limited edition card inside. Gotta catch 'em all.
To be the very best, like no one ever was at the Pokemon trading card game. Your goal? To collect all 8 Master Medals by defeating the 8 Club Masters in a duel. Only then can you challenge the Grand Masters in the Pokemon Dome, and upon defeating them and facing the champion, enter the Hall of Honor, where the legendary cards are housed and protected from those who are not worthy. Whoa, 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 wait a minute. Dueling? Legendary cards? Next you're gonna tell me this all takes place on an island. You're joking. So let me get this straight. We have a trio of God cards that are blue, yellow, and red, and we're on the equivalent of Duelist Kingdom? At least we don't have dual discs. Or the hair. Oh, come on. I'm the Ruby Retro historian, and somehow this isn't the story of a pharaoh fighting the forces of evil, but is actually the story of the Pokemon trading card game for Game Boy Color. Originally released in Japan in October of 1996, the Pokemon trading card game took the world by storm. People across Japan opened packs of Expansion Pack, Jungle, and Mystery of the Fossils, some trying to collect them all, others to boost the power of their decks. If the first ever tournament in 1997 was any indication, most players struggled with how to build competitive decks. Don't believe me? Check out the lists in our video about the tournament. With limited internet access and card scarcity, it's no wonder players struggled to obtain the cards and game knowledge they needed. It was in this environment that game designers saw an opening. What if they could give players an opportunity to have all the cards they wanted for their decks, and teach them how to effectively play the game? Around New Year's Day 1998, game developer Masahiro Tobito created the first prototype of the Pokemon trading card game for the Game Boy Color. Working in conjunction with programmers from the Hudson Company, the designers of the Pokemon TCG developed the game. Development started after the release of Rocket Gang, but game designers saw the game's first 3 sets as the core sets of the budding TCG, so only those cards were included. For the American version, this made much more sense, as the game was released just before the release of the Team Rocket expansion, so it contained almost all the cards players otherwise had access to. With a few extras, but we'll cover those later. Game designer Akihiro Miura recalls discussing with the game's other designers and the programmers how certain cards interacted in order to allow NPCs to play the game competently. It meant resolving all ambiguities in the rules that existed at the time. It's probably also why developers opted to drop Electrode from base set and Ditto from Fossil from the game, because they resulted in mechanics that were just too difficult to program at the time. I mean, Ditto's transform power is a bit confusing, even in real life, so I can only imagine the programming it would take to make it function properly in the game. In a developers roundtable, TCG director Takumi Akabane acknowledged the difficulties in answering all of Hudson's questions. He noted that the design of Leader's Stadium and other gym-era cards took away time from the project. I also just want to point out that this is proof that they actually tested the broken cards in the gym era. But I digress. In addition to Pokemon having their plates full, programmers also struggled to program NPCs that mirrored the play of real-life tournament competitors. Tsunekazu Ishihara noted that while these players were likely better than any of the programmers working on the project, it was really technological limitations that made it impossible to program NPCs to battle at their level. I have to think it would also prove too limiting for those just learning the game to be hit with an onslaught of Haymaker and Rain Dance decks from the get-go, so even if they could program NPCs like this, it might have been too discouraging for new players. That said, the game otherwise placed no restrictions on the decks players could build. Well, other than the obvious 4 of any one card limitation. But it would allow for players to win games with just about any strategy they wanted. Like training your Pokemon on your journey in the original games, players collected cards to strengthen their decks over the course of the game by winning booster packs from NPCs. These NPCs played all manner of decks, so players would see most of the game's 228 cards at some point during their playthrough, letting them hone their strategies to handle whatever their opponents threw at them. Of the 228 cards in the game, only 226 were normally obtainable, while 2 Phantom cards were only available to players through the multiplayer card pop activity. Now, if you know Pokemon as well as we do, you're probably saying, wait a minute, Ruby Retro, even without Ditto and Electrode, there are 101 cards in base set, 48 unique cards in Jungle, and another 46 in Fossil. But that only adds up to 195. So what gives? Well, smart guy, you're right. The other cards include Black Star promos, like Ivy Pikachu, Electabuzz Mewtwo and Pikachu from the first movie, Arcanine, Jigglypuff, Psywave Mew, Meowth, Venusaur, and alternate artwork of Energy Absorption Mewtwo. While it was supposed to be available through Card Pop, Promo Venusaur isn't technically obtainable due to a programming error in the Western version of the game. But it is one of the Phantom cards you could theoretically obtain. Some of the other inclusions were cards we hadn't received in English yet, like Flying Pikachu, 2 arts of Surfing Pikachu, Lilypad Mew, and Super Energy Retrieval. A couple of cards were Japanese promos we would never receive, like Dragonite, Slowpoke, and Imakuni. Yes, I do realize we received Imakuni in English, but that wasn't until years later, so I'm including it in this category. 2 others were printed following the release of the game in the Pokemon web set, Electrode and Tangela. But that still doesn't account for all the cards in the game, so what are these remaining 13? Well, these were game-exclusive cards the designers included to give players a new experience while playing the game, as well as to take advantage of some of the randomness that could be programmed into video games but couldn't exist in real-life play. Most of these game-exclusive cards weren't overly playable for a variety of reasons, but some of them, like the legendary cards, have found their way into players' in-game decks. With that said, let's take a look at some of these exclusive, in-game cards. Each of the legendary birds received a powerful in-game version. Of these, Zapdos is easily the best, with its Peal of Thunder Pokemon power that randomly puts 30 damage on the board on any Pokemon other than itself. That means you can run 4 Zapdos in a deck based around winning on the first turn with Peal of Thunder damage alone. The other birds have powerful abilities as well, with Articuno offering a chance of paralysis, or Moltres, who can search for fire energies to combat the onslaught of removal cards. But they definitely pale in comparison to Zapdos's absolutely broken ability. But don't expect to just race through the game and claim your playset. You can only receive Zapdos by defeating the Grand Masters, and you're limited to 2 copies per game, so you'll have to trade somebody else for the remaining 2 for your Quad Zapdos deck. But the legendary birds weren't the only Pokemon given game-exclusive cards. Ninetales randomly replaced Pokemon in your opponent's hand, and had an attack that flipped an unprecedented 8 coins. Magnemite randomly scatters your lightning energy in play. Sure, moving energy can be helpful, but it's nice to control where it actually goes. Marowak provided an alternative to its unplayable card from Jungle, except that Whale still carries a hefty energy cost for basic Pokemon search, and its effect could benefit your opponent more than you. The Mohawk on this Pidgeot card is probably the best thing about it. Randomly placing 30 damage for 3 energy, or giving a rapid spin effect for 4 energy and 20 damage, it just isn't viable, especially on a stage 2. Jigglypuff carried a random call for family effect, and featured the dreaded Erica's Jigglypuff artwork. Thank goodness that card wasn't included. Ditto discards itself and is replaced by a random basic Pokemon from your deck, making it essentially a worse swoop teleporter or ninja boy that uses up your attack for turn. And you don't even get to pick which Pokemon you're bringing out of your deck. Perhaps the most chaotic of all was Mew, a card pop phantom card. Mew randomly placed damage counters or even special conditions on the defending Pokemon. All of these cards were certainly choices made by the developers. Even the Black Star promo Meowth was rewritten to carry a random in-game effect. Our final cards rounding out the in-game exclusives are 3 evolutions, with each receiving new prints that synergize with double colorless energy. This definitely made them more splashable than their jungle counterparts, but they're really not worth using because better type coverage existed on basic Pokemon. So now that we've talked about what cards are in the game, how could you collect them all, let alone get enough to build a deck? Well, besides obtaining your starter deck, you could make trades, obtain freebies, or grind for packs by defeating other in-game trainers. But you weren't battling for any real-life boosters, instead receiving one of the 4 in-game sets: Coliseum, Evolution, Mystery, or Laboratory, each containing around 50 unique cards. Each pack came with a total of 10 cards, 1 rare, 3 uncommons, and 6 commons. Coliseum functioned as the game's base set, giving the player an energy card in every pack in place of a common card. Other than this set, each of the sets contained a spread of cards from across the real-life game sets, so unlike actual 90s kids, you needed to open more than base set to find the trainers you needed to build a competitive deck. But what's the best strategy to obtain cards? Well, we'll get there, but to better understand how to quickly obtain cards, the game's meta, and why some of the deck lists we're going to look at look the way they do, we need to consider some of the rule differences between the game and real-life tabletop play. You see, game-exclusive cards and packs weren't the only way the developers shook things up. They decided to change some of the rules of the TCG itself. And before you ask, those changes do go further than calling battles duels. Mulligans still exist, but there's no longer a penalty for failing to open a basic Pokemon. So, unlike real-life play during this era, where your opponent got to draw 2 cards for each of your mulligans, your opponent draws nothing. There's no penalty for failing to open a basic Pokemon. Instead, your opponent just sits there and waits for you to find a basic, so you really don't need to run that many basics at all. Additionally, not all duels are played with 6 prize cards. A trademark of the TCG, the 6 prize cards represent the 6 Pokemon you brought to battle that your opponent must knock out in order to win the game. However, different NPCs will challenge players to duels with anywhere from 2 to 6 prize cards, which honestly just makes some strategies completely unviable. Sure, base set Electrode's already gone, so you don't have to worry about Bazap eating up one of your precious prize cards, but this definitely makes fast attacking decks much stronger. You can try to play something like Lickitung Stall, but it's likely you'll lose 2 prize duels because of the ease many decks have in drawing a couple of prize cards before they deck out. Which, speaking of stall, the archetype definitely suffers in-game, not just because of the prize rule or even NPCs running cards like Gambler, but because of how NPC decks are built. Almost every NPC is running over 20 energy cards, making it harder to tongue wrap and removal your opponent out of the game. I mean, just look at some of these deck lists, like Aaron. No, not editor Aaron, but Dr. Mason's lab tech. Aaron lets you choose one of 3 decks to play against in a 4-prize duel, But the one we're looking at is Aaron's Lightning and Fire deck, featuring a lot of different attackers. In this deck, we can find fire Pokemon like Charizard, Arcanine, Rapidash, and both printings of Magmar. His electric Pokemon include Raichu, Magneton, and Electrode, and he even packs Eradicate for good measure. Despite running so many evolutionary lines, he only plays 3 draw cards, but Aaron packs 22 energy, which is shockingly a lower number than most of the NPCs. Other than featuring plenty of the same types of Pokemon, there's really no synergy going on here. I mean, Aaron would need Bazap Electrode to complement Charizard, but that card isn't even in the game. Now, that being said, if you think Aaron's deck is bad, my NPC's deck is even worse. Nicholas challenges players to a 4-prize duel using his Boom Boom Self-Destruct deck. Yeah, an entire deck centered around blowing up your Pokemon. You love to see it, especially in a game that doesn't even have 6 prize cards. Well, there's more synergy going on here than in Aaron's deck. The entire goal of the deck is just to charge up his attackers like Golem, Magneton, and Weezing, and then blow themselves up, going out in a blaze of glory. All that hard work and energy attachments just to be sent back to square one. And before someone in the comments section points it out, yeah, I know he runs Defender to try and avoid KOing himself, but he only runs 2. And of the 4 exploding Pokemon in Nick's deck, only Weezing can avoid being self-KO'd with a single Defender, because for whatever reason, Pokemon printed all the other ones as doing to themselves more damage than they have HP when they explode. And even then, it's likely all for naught, because how is Nicholas even going to find a Defender in this deck? He runs 6 trainers, with only 2 of them being Oak. And why is he running Energy Search? Half of his deck is already Energy. I really doubt he's going to have a hard time finding one of those. Now, let's not end on a sour note with NPC decks. We have a few more decks we can take a look at that are named for friends of the channel, including Andrew's Blistering Pokemon deck and future guest star Michael's Heated Battle deck. Andrew's deck packs plenty of Stage 1 Pokemon like Rapidash, Marowak, and even the elusive Rhydon from Jungle. Though he has the right energy types, Andrew's missing the basic Haymaker 1-2 punch of Hitmonchan and Magmar, because let's face it, Onyx just doesn't cut it. At least he plays 5 draw cards, but in a deck that feels like it actually wants Energy Search, it's nowhere to be found. Andrew's deck completely pales in comparison to Michael's, which is basically a Haymaker deck that runs the wrong Magmar and plays no draw cards. But Michael does play Electabuzz and Hitmonchan, and even splashes in Hitmonlee for good measure. I guess the lack of draw cards is made up for with the inclusion of Fetch Kangaskhan. And he even runs Plus Power. Honestly, I think even as an adult, I'd be kind of afraid to face this deck early on in the game. It has the potential to take some quick wins with its efficient basic attackers, maybe even scoring turn 1 wins thanks to Plus Power. Michael definitely has the best deck of the 4. Despite that, these 4 decks are honestly pretty representative of all the NPC decks in the game, running well over 20 energy cards and lacking many of the powerful trainers you'd otherwise expect to see during this era. I mean, not even the Grand Masters have powerful decks. Well, maybe the exception of Steve and his 2 Peal of Thunder's Zapdos. But just look at the champion Ronald and his legendary Pokemon deck. In true Yu-Gi-Moto style, Ronald packs the God cards, the legendary birds, the Eevees, and Dragonite. But honestly, it's pretty clear the developers just wanted to cram as many game-exclusive cards into his final boss deck as possible. Like, what exactly is the strategy here? Type coverage? I mean, he doesn't even play energy to attack with any of the birds other than Moltres, running only fire energy. I know everything else is colorless and that fire synergizes with Moltres' Fire Giver power, but given how insanely powerful Zapdos' Big Thunder is, if they were going for difficulty, that's where the devs should have focused. A lot of players might look to the Squirtle and Friends starter deck as a good place to start building an in-game deck, because it gives the player a Blastoise, Hitmonchan, and many important trainer cards. While it's probably not the most competitive at the start of the game, it definitely serves as a base to build a solid in-game Rain Dance deck. Let's swap out a few cards and voila, we have a solid option for many of the in-game trainers. While you're probably not beating a lot of actual players with this build, running plenty of draw and strong basic options to attack with never hurts. And the deck even makes use of the rarely seen Ammonite. Now, as the game progresses and you acquire more cards, you can easily change the deck to a straight Rain Dance build, like this one here, running only Squirtles to capitalize on the lack of in-game mulligan penalty. With plenty of draw, Pokeballs to find additional Squirtles on the first turn, or Blastoise on the next turn to combo with Pokemon Breeder, and energy searches, this deck ensures you get the fastest Blastoise possible. You can make this list even more aggressive by cutting some water energies for more trainers like Recycle to ensure you can bill or oak into whatever resource you need. That said, you can run through just about any NPC with this list. Another strategy to dominate NPCs involves getting a hold of one of the Peal of Thunder Zapdoses and using its powerful 70 damage attack to KO just about anything an NPC can throw at you. But a deck of 1 or 2 Zapdos really isn't that original. If you're looking for an original lightning deck, check out Discord user SaviorSword's Magneton list. It makes use of the in-game Magnemite as well as both printings of Magneton. The goal is simple, but the execution is a work of art. You want to spread damage around to your opponent's board, so when you use self-destruct, you take multiple prizes thanks to its bench damaging power, while protecting your own Pokemon from damage with a high count of defenders. And because most of the NPCs don't run any of the energy removal cards, it's easy to power up the 4 energy Magneton to make quick work of your opponent's board. Reddit user DeekMania found that Mewtwo Fossils was the best strategy for them, hitting up the Battle Arena events multiple times to obtain a playset of energy absorption Mewtwo's. Because Mewtwo recovers energy, it's easy to fly through your deck turn 1 and recover all energies discarded without fear of being hit with removal cards. Aerodactyl stops evolutions that Mewtwo can't easily KO, and running Fossils means this player can tech Kabuto from Fossil as a counter to the one NPC who plays Mr. Mime. But there's no doubt that the best deck for crushing NPCs is Do the Wave. Discord user Ophthalmoscope created this list, which runs only 4 Jigglypuff, ensuring you start it every game and abusing the absence of a mulligan penalty. But with only 4 Jigglypuff and 4 Wigglytuff in the deck, how does this deck hit big numbers with Do the Wave? Well, the deck also includes trainer Pokemon, like Mysterious Fossil and Clefairy to fill your bench with before announcing Do the Wave for Knockout. While most of the decks we've covered require some initial in-game work to assemble, all of them ensure you can grind NPCs for packs to get the cards to build whatever deck you want. So once you have a playset of every card, what can you do with them? Well, you can play against your friends, of course. Thanks to adding the game to the Switch, players from around the globe can exchange friend codes to battle from great distances. The 1999 Pokemon Discord server constantly hosts tournaments using the Game Boy game, so players can put their skills and newly grinded cards to the test. But until now, we've only covered what decks do well against NPCs. So what can we cook up to take on real opponents? Well, Jason Klasinski set out to answer just that question, incorporating many of the in-game exclusive cards into his base to fossil decks. So, without any further ado, let's take a look at some of the decks he's put together. The best deck in multiplayer mode is without a doubt a deck running 4 copies of Peal of Thunder Zapdos, 4 Chansey, and a whopping 52 trainer cards to ensure you win the game on the first turn thanks to Zapdos' power. This deck runs just about every card you can think of to ensure you see your entire deck turn 1 and get off as many Peal of Thunders as you need to bench out your opponents. In fact, this deck is so good, the 1999 Pokemon Discord server decided to ban Zapdos from its tournaments entirely, so don't expect to bring this one to competitive play anytime soon. And that's probably for the best, because it's just too format warping to warrant tournament play, given all the draw and trainer recovery in this format. So, if Zapdos is out, well, what decks are in? Jason devised a Rain Dance build that takes advantage of the new Articuno with the Quick Freeze power to paralyze the opponent's active. Constructed as a slower build of Rain Dance than we're used to, the deck runs 3 of this Articuno with ways to recycle its paralyzing power. This is also the only version of Rain Dance you'll see that lacks Breeder, instead opting for a max count of Wartortle and relying on Kangaskhan as its starter of choice to fetch additional cards from the deck while setting up a Blastoise on the bench. And with Super Energy Retrieval in game, you can more efficiently recover any discarded water energy. Thanks to Quick Freeze Articuno's paralysis going through Invisible Wall, not even cards like Mr. Mime can slow down this deck, making it a fantastic choice in the meta. But Blastoise isn't the only starter Pokemon that received a buff. The inclusion of Promo Venusaur as a Card Pop exclusive card gives the deck a big boost to its power. While you'll still struggle with decks that include Magmar, this variant sets up in a manner similar to Blastoise, but with even more reliance on Kangaskhan. The deck looks to set up a Venusaur with plenty of energy on board, to then move them around with Energy Trans before safely healing your Pokemon with Pokemon Center. To avoid falling prey to your opponent's energy removals, spread out your energy while setting up your Pokemon. You'll dodge super energy removals and be able to move them to your attacker once you get a Venusaur online. Wigglytuff also receives a big boost in-game, thanks in no small part to Moltres, allowing you to easily search out Fire Energy with its Fire Giver attack to keep pace with your opponent's energy removals. Because you're already running Fire Energy, Magmar is an easy inclusion in the deck, providing access to Smokescreen and Smog to help in the format's grindier matchups. While you're definitely going to struggle against Rain Dance decks, this deck goes toe-to-toe with any stall variant thanks to Magmar being a check to Lickitung, and an obvious answer to Venusaur decks. You can also consider cutting Scythers to run a Dodrio line in the deck, but space is pretty tight because you need scoop-ups to continually recycle Moltres. The last deck Jason provides us with is a deck you've been hearing about this entire video, Lickitung Stall. Yeah, it might not be great against NPCs, but it continues to hold its own against real-life opponents. If you play the modern Base to Fossil format, you might notice that this list is very different from the Psychic-based stall decks you're probably used to seeing. That's because staple Psychic Pokemon like Mr. Mime just aren't as good in-game with Quick Freeze Articuno running around. Instead, the deck runs Electabuzz to handle the lightning-weak Blastoise and max counts of Lickitungs and Scythers to keep up a steady stream of attackers. To close out the game, the deck includes Psyduck to checkmate your opponent into deck out with its Headache attack, which blocks trainer cards like Gambler and Lass. You have to be careful when trying to deck out your opponents, because this list doesn't run any cards to reset your own deck count. Besides the list from Jason, Discord user Enigami provided us with a Dragonite list to showcase the power of the in-game Dragonite. This legendary card heals 20 damage from each of your Pokemon when it's put into play. Though it doesn't have the strongest attacks, Dragonite provides synergy with Slowbro from Fossil to manipulate the amount of damage on each Pokemon with its strange behavior power before placing Dragonite into play. Sure, you could play Alakazam, but let's face it, multiple stage 2s in a deck is clunky, even by today's standards. Unless you're running Pidgeot alongside Charizard, and I don't mean any of the in-game ones. With its constant healing and Dragonair's Hyper Beam, the deck also carries strong stall potential, but it can struggle against higher damaging decks like Wigglytuff. Though the deck might not be the most competitive, it's a great way to showcase the potential of a Dragonite we would never receive in English, and it also means each of the 4 legendary cards has a home somewhere in competitive play. Just like we'd never receive Dragonite in English, we also wouldn't receive the sequel to the TCG Game Boy game. Japan would receive a second version of the game with updated NPC lists that would make the game more difficult, as well as the new Team Rocket cards. After that, it wouldn't be until the launch of Pokemon TCG Online that we would receive another digitized version of the game. But the legacy of the game has clearly lived on, with players returning to the Game Boy Color game time and again even before it was released on the Switch. And whether you play the game for the nostalgia factor or to compete with your friends, there's honestly something in the game for everyone. And frankly, it's a great way to experience old school Pokemon. We want to thank you so much for watching. If you're interested in more decks from this era, head on over to PTCG Legends and check out their 1999 format page. While they don't have any of the in-game exclusive cards on there, they have tons of great deck lists from this era. If you enjoyed this special episode, be sure to like and subscribe so we know to keep making side videos like this. Or come hang out in our Discord server. You can also follow us on Twitter, where we're constantly posting retro content. I'm the Ruby Retro Historian signing out and hoping you enjoyed this look back at one of the greatest games on Game Boy Color.